Can I be Switzerland like I usually always am?
Of course.
I totally see their perspective, Momofuku and David Chang and their CEO. I listened to that podcast. And after you listen to the podcast, you're like, oh, I get it. I get their point of view. I don't think they were trying to do anything particularly harmful. Yet then Tim is like, are they playing dumb? And you do kind of go, well, yeah, I mean, it is a CEO and a founder of this brand. And, you know, they should know that.
Now, in honor of AAPI month, we figured we'd take a topic hot off the presses and have a roundtable discussion around David Chang and Momofuku's trademark situation stemming from a cease and desist letter they received from a small brand out of Colorado called Chili Crunch with an E, but more on that later. After the trademark war went viral, it didn't take long for the backlash to set in. Across social media, commenters called out Chang and Momofuku for bullying other condiment brands, some of those being one or two people operations, into ceasing the use of the term Chili Crunch to describe their products. Jonathan, why don't you take a minute to help set this up a little more and tell us why this is so interesting and relevant to chalk and branding in general?
What we like to think about when we think about brands at Chalk is almost picture them as kind of like beings, right? Like they're more than the sum of the parts. They're almost like an organism or a human or whatever, where everything they do kind of has some effects and ramifications to it.
Sarah Mai, you lived in New York City for a while. Can you give us some insight into the Momofuku brand?
So it was really trendy at the time, really cool vibe. They did have a little bit of attitude. They kind of had a no substitutions, just general take on things like, we created the menu, we know it's best, just trust us, which is great.
The very thing that makes Momofuku and David Chang so appealing, like you were saying, Sarah Mai, is kind of that indie cred, or at least the personal story of this guy, this like Asian American chef working his way up, right? And so it's especially bad optics for that guy to be the one who turns around and punches down now, and is really grounded in his story. And his story, he even says in his apology, he like invokes his Asian American identity, right? And how his story has always been about bringing that identity to his work. And so you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like if he's built his brand on this story, that's it. That's his brand. And when you undermine that when it looks like he goes after the next indie Asian American little guy, that's like, it looks like hypocrisy, and nobody likes hypocrisy. Now to get into his apology,
this letter looks a lot like getting the door slammed in your face, right?
Yeah, and I think the thing is, his apology is good. Like that's where I want to end. His apology is really successful, and he does invoke all that indie cred. So it's kind of like he is able to have his cake and eat it too.
Tim, can you go into the trademark situation a little more and kind of give us a few more details?
Oh, geez, I can try. I think there's people at the USPTO and trademark lawyers out there that can't even unpack this one completely. But really what it boils down to when you're talking about like what trademark infringement is, it's basically like, is it going to cause confusion? If you roll out this product name, is it going to cause confusion with an already established trademark? Yeah, what they decided to do to hold on to this was to license that mark from Chili Colonial, right? So as soon as they did that, once they received this trademark, the license to use it, they're kind of stuck, right? That you have to defend that trademark if you own it. What that means is like if you see anyone else out there in the marketplace using that mark, you're required by law to continue your ownership of the mark to send out cease and desist letters to prevent that confusion in the marketplace. If you fail to do that as a company, then you're basically abandoning your mark. And that means it's basically up for grabs for someone else to come in and say, no, we can demonstrate usage of this. You didn't try to stop us. So we're going to run with it. And so that's a possibility. I mean, my take on it is that's what you have to do with a trademark. So I understand the emotional response from a lot of people. I get the whole idea about gatekeeping, but in terms of like businesses operating and using trademarks, this is how it works. I've got a lot of thoughts on how this mark even originated. And Chang even mentioned this in this podcast, that like this trademark is kind of like, the ring of power now. It was kind of forged in the fires of Mount Doom, the USPTO in their office. And now it can't be destroyed. This thing just exists and someone has to hold on to it. And that's what they're trying to do by holding on to it and just, not using it, not enforcing it, right? So they're trying to open up the gates, to allow usage.
Yeah, if I could jump in here, I think it gets even weirder. Like the USPTO office definitely doesn't cover off on the design of any of this, or maybe the naming structure. But it gets a lot weirder when you start to see these, and hopefully we can throw up a visual of this here. But you could see that Chili Colonial really was using Chili Crunch as almost like a brand level name, right? Like they have a whole suite of products under this Chile Crunch name. So it was basically their brand, Chili Colonial, at least from what I can gather, looking at their website, packaging and whatnot, is very background. So I could see why they would want to defend something like that. That makes a little more sense to me. Whereas like in the Momofuku situation, it's more of a product level name. It's like ketchup or whatever, right? So like it doesn't seem to have a real need to become this like distinct and ownable name.
I guess the next big question is, are you guys part of the side that was upset with this, or do you see his point? Are you going to defend him now? Like, what's your take on this?
Can I be Switzerland like I usually always am?
Of course.
I totally see their perspective, Momofuku and David Chang and their CEO. I listened to that podcast. And after you listen to the podcast, you're like, oh, I get it. I get their point of view. I don't think they were trying to do anything particularly harmful. Yet then Tim is like, are they playing dumb? And you do kind of go, well, yeah, I mean, it is a CEO and a founder of this brand. And, they should know that. And even if their legal team is doing, all the cease and desist.
Should know that.
Their legal team should know that. And even if
Definitely.
your legal team, even if your legal team is external, maybe they're not a part of maybe they're a separate legal firm, you should have a brand that internally and externally is really clear on what you stand for. And I think that's kind of at the heart of why this stood out for us, this issue so much, is because brand is where we live and where we play. And, having an internal brand where your whole team, even your legal team, even if they are external, knows where you stand with things and knows how far you're willing to go. And you have conversations about it, right?
100%. And I'll say it too. Like I see the muddiness in like the cease and desist was sent by Momofuku, right? But like all the backlash is David Chang.
I think I'm probably like maybe the millennial hipster take on this, which is that like the whole point of buying, if like you can get this chili crunch from anyone, the whole point of buying it from someone like Momofuku is that it's Momofuku or it's David Chang.
But I would say, if I could reference the of course, I'm the design guy, so I want to go like to the designs of it too. But if you're at the Whole Foods, which I believe they are in, and you're not familiar with Momofuku or David Chang, and you see all the packaging side by side, like they have a really good thing going. Like I felt like their packaging's amazing. Like it's really stands out in the space. It stands out against their competitors and on shelves. I think in particular. Kind of highlighting the product really nicely, like making it look, kind of tasty, spicy, whatever. But also, they just have a little bit of that unexpected kind of bubbly quality to them. So I think a lot of that comes through too. Like I don't know where I'm going with this, I guess, but I don't know what, that they had to overwork it is what I keep coming back to with all this legal nonsense. Again, ring of power. It was bestowed upon them. Okay. I do buy that a bit, but
I love that analogy. I think there's truth to it. But I mean, at the end of the day, I'm here to be the backlash to the backlash. I guess the pragmatist here. That's like, y'all know that this is how business works. There's trademarks out there. If someone's using the name for something, you can't just come in and occupy that space. That's the way this works. I want to roll out a cereal called, Captain Crisp. I can't do that. Captain Crunch has that cornered, right? That's going to cause confusion potentially by using the Captain.
I don't know.
It may not be the best example.
Those bags I swear there's 10 bags called Captain Crisp or or
It
Colonel
might be
Crunch
close.
or whatever
I-
it is.
Cereal's a weird
But I
example
guess
because there probably is one called Captain Crisp out there on the bottom shelf right now.
There
Right.
might be. I should have done my homework before rolling that analogy. But I guess at the end of the day, it's like, look, if you see that this name, Chili Crunch is trademarked, like Momofuku should have seen before they even rolled out the name, right? There's a due diligence that should happen there from anybody who's rolling out a product.
Right.
You gotta see if that name is claimed.
You do the USPTO search, right? Like we do. I mean,
Yep.
like as part of our process, right? Which is widely available.
Or have
to
a
everybody.
lawyer do it. I mean, anyone can do
yeah.
it themselves, right? If you want to save money or whatever. The small business that says they can't afford a lawyer, you can look. This is an open database, right? And so, yeah, if you see active marks for the term that you want or something close, then you are walking into that. If you want to use that name, understanding that you're taking that risk. So I get all that, right? And so I'm not completely unsympathetic to these people. Like, I want to actually share a couple quotes here because I think this is where it kind of gets interesting and kind of emotional, right? So you've got like Jing Gao, who's the founder of and CEO of Fly by Jing, right? That's this other chili sauce company that's used chili crisp for some time now. He said he was, I'm sorry, I beg your pardon. So Jing Gao, she says that like she was disheartened to see that Chang is going after numerous brands, including small minority women-founded businesses. Okay, that's fair, right? But here she's saying this kind of action, if successful, sets a dangerous precedent for the squashing of fair competition. What? It's a trademark. Like this is where, like, her beef is with the USPTO, not with Momofuku and David Chang here, right? Like this trademark exists. It's in the world. That's nobody's fault but the people at USPTO who fucked up, in my opinion, and granted one for a generic term. So, I mean, she even follows it up by saying how ridiculous this is to try and take ownership of a generic cultural term. Agreed, but it happened like in a roundabout way with, Chili Colonial having this term. But the fact is that the mark exists. And then even you've got Eric Huang here, who's, the founder of Pecking House in New York, saying that trademarking food is an exercise in capitalist nonsense. Well, yeah, maybe, but that's the reality of it. And here's what's really funny, I think, too, right? It's like he goes on to say that like, that building a business, there's all this work that goes into recipe testing and the logistics of creating a food product. And like, but the only reason that you would trademark food is for a soulless cash grab. I don't know, right? If these things are protected, then I don't know why that's a soulless cash grab if you're trying to protect your mark. But here's the thing. I'm also an anarchist in this sense too. Like, because I think this whole thing is a slippery slope, right? If you're going to trademark generic terms, if we're going to trademark, ideas, this is different than patents, right? Which is like an invention, right? This is something that, it's not even different than patents really, because you've got patents on life, right? On genetic code. There's precedent for all this stuff. It's happening, and it's crazy, right? And now we're in this world of AI, where all these things are being produced with image generation, not to mention just the text generation that's pulling from other people's work. Good luck, everybody. I think the wheels are starting to come off the whole trademark thing, to be honest with you. And I think you started to see it with music sampling decades ago, right? This has been in the works, but now that so many more people have access to these creation tools, it's going to get really hard to police this stuff. And I say fine, frankly. I know, Josh, you have a different take on it, but I just think good luck with all this. It's a very difficult thing to do. Open source world. It starts here. Let's do it.
Nice.
It is funny that like protecting, like the idea of owning intellectual property, and to make that distinction about trademark and patent, like a patent is an invention, right? So you protect it for X amount of time until it expires, so no one can copy your product and sell it under any other name. A trademark is just the name, so that no one can use that same name and sell other stuff or the same stuff or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's so amorphous and kind of ethereal. And it is a kind of an odd idea. Like the whole notion is kind of strange when you really break it down. But it is like a foundational idea in our economy. And it's so much about what we do in the business of branding is, create and kind of like carve out a meaning for an intellectual property, right? Because like it's just about controlling or manipulating the perception of a brand. It's kind of about like building that meaning, building those associations over time until that intellectual property means something. If you can't protect intellectual property anymore at all, a lot of what we do kind of falls by the wayside. I feel like, if it, you know.
Yeah.
I agree,
mean,
disagree
maybe.
on that.
Yeah,
Like,
go
I
ahead.
think you always gotta like move forward. I feel like you just gotta keep up to some degree, right? Like, whereas trademarking does seem a little archaic and a little like, well, I'm gonna block off my kind of corner of the space and then run my business happily and contently without ever having to worry about anything again. So I don't know. I feel like it's just part of doing business, especially in the 21st century where everything's moving like incredibly quickly. Like you're just gonna have to adapt.
Yeah, I think a lot of the backlash is actually directed at the system. They just don't know it's directed at the system. And instead
Right.
it's being directed at David Chang and Momofuku. But when you look at the arguments, they actually are attacking the system because he's just following the system that's in place, like you said. So I think
Right.
and I do go to that. I lean towards Josh's perspective in that like the system's broken. We need to fix the system. Something's not working here. It doesn't feel like this works in general for our society. But I feel like when it comes to branding, it comes down to the generic kind of aspect of it. I do think there is a place for trademarks and patents and everything if you really have a unique idea, unique product, unique name. When you get into the generic things, it feels shitty. It feels like you are trying to trademark a general thing, and it feels solely based on capitalism. It doesn't feel like there's any soul to it. There's any pride, passion in it. So I don't know. That's what it comes down to for me.
I think one other thing
I
that's
think
really interested in this story, sorry if I could hop in real quick, is that
please.
like it's a 10-year-old patent that, at the 10 years ago, I mean, there wasn't store shelves full of Chili Crunch, or, most consumers didn't know what Chili Crunch was, maybe even 5 years ago. So it is interesting. I don't know what like the typical USPTO process is for something that may have been more original at some point and then eventually just becomes part of every day. Like, is there a process for that? I don't know, but I think that's the case here.
Yeah, that's an awesome point. I think the USPTO, I mean, there's got to be rules to this game of business, right? Somebody creates a new store, new restaurant. You can't just build the exact same thing with the exact same. I mean, it wouldn't work, right? So I understand the need for some protection here, but I think the USPTO has to evolve with the times to a certain extent and review these things, right? Like reevaluating trademarks over time. And who knows, this is me coming from a place of ignorance here too. They may do this, right? Because you're right. At the time, that may not have been deemed a generic term or a descriptive term. But now that, we've seen this proliferation of products, it's become genericized. And it gets a little dicey that way. I mean, where do you draw the line there? Is all of a sudden like Q-tips and Kleenex, are those generified enough that they lose their mark if that's, usage? I know that's extreme, but yeah, I think some evolution here is in order. I mean, it has to happen. The tools that people have are changing. The speed at which information proliferates is, it's night and day. We're in a different world now.
Josh,
Kleenex is not a bad reference. Sorry.
I was going to say, like,
Josh.
one reason why we were talking about how this is kind of tricky because it's a generic thing, or maybe even like a historic or cultural thing that existed long before David Chang. But I think the fact that he's selling this product that you can get elsewhere is kind of maybe why it captured our imagination when it became a scandal about his brand a little bit, because then the only reason I would choose Momofuku's Chili Crunch off the shelf at Whole Foods with no other context is the brand, right? Maybe I've heard of Momofuku Maybe I have some associations with the brand already. Maybe I just like the way it looks. And so all the work that distinguishes this chili crisp from the next one, or crunch or whatever, is the creative work of branding, because you haven't tasted it yet. You don't know which one tastes better. You know, they're more or less the same thing. You can see right there on the shelf. So like the creative work of branding is the value add, is the distinguishing thing. And I think like trademark is about protecting the value of that creative work, which is also what we do, right? We are the ones who come in and help you distinguish your same product from the other guys selling the same product. And I think like my head goes to all the missteps, like how easily Chang could have avoided this whole thing, or what we would have done if we had been there to stop it.
Go ahead.
Well, I'd start with this, right? I mean, we're going to take a creative approach to everything we do, right? That's what we do. And I think, talking about getting a cease and desist letter, for example, like it seems harsh, right? It's terrifying to see that language. But if you take a step back, you realize that this is just the beginning of the conversation. That's all it is. The legal language is opaque, it's harsh, and it doesn't seem that way. But ultimately, that's all it is. It's just saying, hey, can we talk about this? Because that we're using that name. So then the conversation can go from there. It can go to a place where it went with Momofuku, which is licensing that trademark, or it can go to a place where like, okay, I'm going to respect this and come up with an original name and adopt the descriptive term to identify my product as chili crisp or whatever, but I can name it whatever the heck I want, right? There's still this opportunity to create an identity and ownership around a thing, even if there is, myriad, countless options on the market. I mean, that's what I think we're best at, is if there's like a shelf filled with, the sea of sameness out there, how can you stand out? We can do that with naming, with design, with positioning, but with so many different things. The tools that are in our toolkit are there to work around the trademarks that exist, to lean into things that other people have maybe already established by like creating this category. Isn't it a gift that there's a generic term now for chili crisp? I think that gives you permission to name it whatever you want now, if you can have that descriptor. Reminding everybody what this product is, that's licensed to call it whatever you want at that point, which is where the fun begins. So that's my take on it. I think this is, if people can look at this as an opportunity, I guess ever the optimist over here, right? But ultimately, I think that's what it is. It's like, good, someone else has named it that, and we don't want to name it that. We want something original. And I think that's what Momofuku and Chang were going with from the very beginning. They wanted it to be an American version that differed, somewhat significantly from the Chinese original, right? And I think that's cool, but I think they lost sight of that. And I think ultimately what we do too is brand strategy. I want to let somebody else chime in here too, and just how that a brand is a lot more than that logo, that word mark, that color palette, that design language. It's behavior, right? And this is an example of behavior really undermining the brand's value.
Most good marketers, good branding creative types know this, but it's easy to forget in the worlds of legal, HR, whatnot. But really, anything you do on behalf of your brand is your brand, right? Like, it's like, again, coming back to that, like, we think of it as this entity. So it's like the whole company acting as one essentially becomes this entity. So in this case, a legal matter affected the brand way more than probably many years of hard work have, right? Like, one little thing undid a lot of good work, and that can be really disheartening. And we can understand the distance that you can kind of experience from a brand in working in in-house, and we've been at various companies and understand that there's a lot of times this big gap between the understanding of what brand is. A lot of people just think it's a marketing function, and doesn't permeate the entire business. But we certainly see it that way, and that's why we kind of geek out on this, because I can't think of a better example of this. We even talked about other, like, what are other situations where legal matters have kind of affected people and ended up landing on, or companies, not people, ended up landing on music, and finding a couple of analogies in the way Metallica handled the Napster situation forever ago, dating myself here. Did not go well, did not look good for them. They basically attacked their customers, and said, don't do this. You counter that with, just in the past few years, Taylor Swift had legal issues owning the rights to her music or whatever. She definitely kind of outmaneuvered in a legal fashion and made herself look better. It drove a deeper connection with her customers. So we see, like, as Tim was saying, there's opportunity in these things, and to know yourself and to know your brand, it should help your entire organization, and at least serve as some sort of kind of check and balance system.
I love that analogy, right? Because like here you have two people, Metallica, the group, and then Taylor Swift, right? Like as successful as they possibly could have been in their genre, right? Like, Swift has probably transcended genre, of course, more than once. But like a play like that could easily perceived as greedy, right? Like what Metallica did, that was definitely the backlash. Like, oh, you need even more money than you already have. It just seemed like a dickish thing to do. But when Taylor did it, it was handled completely differently. Like she controlled the narrative. She understood the optics of it, I think. And it became a story of empowerment, right? It wasn't about greed or like a cash grab, right? It was about integrity and wanting to control her creation. And it's funny how similar those situations are. I'm sure people could probably point out some of the distinctions, but when I look at the way those two things are handled, it's kind of night and day. And and the results kind of speak for themselves, right? You can see what happened with Swift's brand. Metallica's probably recovered a little bit, but that put them on a different trajectory. They'd be a completely different band in people's minds today had they not undergone that all that backlash from that move.
Yeah, well, we could spend a whole hour on the music for sure. But any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I actually was thinking just specifically, I think we covered all of our kind of major thoughts and points, but I think coming back to brand, this is why a brand, what we call a brand architecture, is so important. Some people call it a brand book, a brand Bible, what have you. It's really what makes up your brand, all those little, elements and how they come together as a whole, and treated like a person or an entity, a living organism. In your document of your architecture, we actually go through these exercises of what's your brand personality. We have these is and isn't. Your brand is this, it's like this, it isn't like this. And so those whole examples of like, we're a brand that doesn't punch down, regardless of our status, regardless of how big we're going to get. We embrace all other, AAPI companies and brands. It's just those things are in your document, are in this kind of, it's also, we kind of consider it a living document because it's constantly evolving, just like we think the USPTO should. And everybody's every department of your organization lives by this brand architecture. They know it, they understand it, they comprehend it, and they enforce it. And so everybody's speaking the same language. And I think that's also why employer brands are so important as well. It's the really internally what your culture is. It's not just how you project your brand externally and how you get customers and how you interact with them. It's how you get, your actual people who are going to work for you, who are going to work with your brand, become your brand, and then, put that out to the masses, put that out to your customer base, your clients. And I just think we are all so passionate about those things. And I think that that's how, we would do things differently, or, we would make sure when you're establishing a brand, when you're reestablishing your brand, or even a product, that the product has its own kind of set of guidelines and rules that fits within your brand. There's nothing about it that contradicts it. Everything should work together cohesively.
In this case, I feel like Chang mentioned his culinary philosophy. I think it was in his response on his podcast, and having that as kind of a driving understanding that led to some of the naming decisions, things like that. Now, I may be ignorant to anything else they have or the way they're talking about it, but I feel like they need to expand on that, right? Like either so everybody in the company can understand it. Maybe it's, too up to kind of David Chang, like in his head, we've seen this many times where there's like it really insightful, brilliant leader, but it's not, the information is not going to be communicated to everyone, or there's something, like the telephone game, like the important details are kind of lost along the way as it gets to everybody else. So I think, I would recommend to them that they, extrapolate or build on that to find like how that culinary philosophy can equal a business kind of philosophy, a system of values and checks and balances or whatever that, really captures the idea around that culinary philosophy, but speaks in terms that the entire business can respond to.
Yeah, that's what it's about, right? At the end of the day, it's like, what do you stand for as an organization? What are your values? What's this built on? When we put together a brand package, we always talk about the value of it, and that it's going to help your company make decisions, right? And it's a weird thing when you think about if for people that aren't initiated or as deep into brand as we are, that like that's a huge part of it, right? If you know what you stand for, if you've got that North Star in place, if you know what your values are, making decisions like this one become a lot easier, because it kind of boils down to, depending on what your values are, is it the right thing to do? But does it reinforce who we are? Do all the people that have signed up to work here, you've made a choice to hitch their career and their life to our organization, do they buy into this? Do they support this decision? So if you have a culture as an organization, if you've got a brand that lives that culture, yeah, it becomes integrated into everything. It's about who you hire. It's about how you promote people. It's how you develop people. It's inextricably tied to the goals that your individuals have within your organization and the organization itself. Yeah, I could go on and on, but yeah, this is just about the depth of brand. It really is everything. It's evolved to become so much more than just, that design toolkit or whatever it is, right? It really is. I think, was it Marty Neumeier? I could be wrong, who said that it's not what you say your brand is. Your brand is what they say it is, right? It's all about perception. So that includes, that's your employees, right? That's your people. That's your customers. That's what brand is.
Well, that was a lot to unpack there. Super informative. Very appreciative of everybody's time. We will definitely do this again. But thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, everybody. Fun chat with y'all.